1885, Colorado, the Crimson Train. Passengers lost on a moving ghost. They called it the Crimson Train. A gleaming marvel of its time, painted in deep red lacquer that shimmered like fresh blood under the western sun. Built by the Denver and Western Railway, it was meant to symbolize progress, wealth, and the triumph of man over the untamed Rockies. On October 17, 1885, it departed from Denver carrying 21 passengers, merchants, dignitaries, miners, and a young pianist named Eliza Grayson, who was to perform at the Silver Plume Opera House that evening. None of them were ever seen again. The Crimson Train was more than a locomotive. It was a symbol of Colorado's growing pride in 1885, a moving monument to ambition, progress, and wealth. Commissioned by the Denver and Western Railway, it gleamed under the sun like a vein of metal drawn straight from the heart of the Rockies. The train's body was painted a deep, lustrous red, the kind that seemed almost alive when the light hit it, earning it the name, the Crimson Train. It wasn't just its color that caught attention. It was its presence. The brass fixtures shone like gold, the windows were framed in polished oak, and the interior boasted velvet-lined seats imported from New York. For the people of Denver, it represented not just industry but pride, a testament that the rugged West could build something as fine and grand as anything found in the East. Its maiden voyage on October 17th was meant to be a celebration, a sign that the mountains no longer ruled over man. Among the 21 passengers were figures who embodied the era's restless optimism. There was Colonel Matthew Kane, a retired Army officer turned investor, rumored to have put a fortune into silver mining near Silver Plume. Eliza Grayson, a young pianist from New Orleans, had been invited to perform at the new opera house that very evening, a symbol of art and refinement finding its home in the mining towns. Alongside them were railroad officials, journalists, and families dressed in their finest traveling attire, ready to witness the Rockies from a luxury unseen in those parts. The train's route was short but treacherous, climbing over steep grades, cutting through tunnels blasted from solid granite, and skirting cliffs where one misjudged curve could mean disaster. But the Denver and Western boasted of its innovation: stronger steel, advanced brakes, and a locomotive engine that could conquer both altitude and cold. They called it the Monarch, a mechanical heart that beat with the promise of a new age. Its engineer, Henry Caldwell, was known for his precision and discipline, a man who treated his engine as though it were alive. To him, the train wasn't a machine. It was a living thing that responded to care, respect, and intuition. At the platform that morning, steam hissed against the chill air, mingling with the laughter of the passengers. Onlookers waved, children pointed, and the brass band played as the conductor called out, "All aboard for Silver Plume!" The air was alive with optimism, the kind that only the frontier could inspire. No one could have imagined that within a few hours, the very symbol of their triumph would become the greatest mystery the Colorado rails had ever known. As the Crimson Train pulled out of Denver, its crimson paint caught the morning sun and seemed to shimmer like liquid fire, cutting through the valleys with a sound that echoed like a heartbeat fading into the mountains. It was progress in motion, a masterpiece destined never to return. The Crimson Train departed Denver under clear skies, its whistle echoing across the plains as it began its climb toward the mountains. The route from Denver to Silver Plume was a familiar one to most engineers, a 2-day passage through winding canyons, narrow tunnels, and frost-bitten ridges. But by dawn of the second day, telegraph stations reported something strange. The train had not arrived at its scheduled checkpoint in Georgetown. Operators waited, assuming a delay. Storm clouds had rolled in from the west, and the mountain air carried the scent of snow. Yet as night fell and no message came through, concern turned to confusion. When the second night passed without word, the Denver and Western dispatched search crews along the route. What they found, or rather what they didn't, would haunt Colorado for decades. The tracks were intact, the tunnels clear, and the telegraph lines still humming with static. No signs of derailment, no broken rails, no scorched timber from a boiler explosion. It was as if 21 passengers, 2 engineers, and 1,000 tons of metal had simply vanished into thin air. The last confirmed sighting came from a signalman near Empire Pass, who had watched the train vanish into the mouth of the twin tunnels just after dusk. He later swore that the sound of its wheels never faded, even long after it should have emerged from the other side. He said the echo went on for nearly an hour, a metallic rhythm pulsing through the rock like a heartbeat that refused to stop. By the fifth day, the company organized a larger expedition. Miners, engineers, and lawmen equipped with lanterns, rifles, and horses. They followed the tracks mile by mile, checking every bridge and embankment. At one sharp bend, they discovered fragments of broken glass and a torn length of red fabric tangled in a pine branch, believed to be from one of the passengers' coats. But there were no footprints, no wreckage, no sign of struggle. The rails simply continued on, disappearing into the gray fog that drifted through the canyon. Families gathered at Denver Station, clinging to hope that the train had been delayed by snow or mechanical failure. The company issued statements claiming the locomotive was likely stalled beyond Georgetown due to weather, but the telegraph lines to Silver Plume remained eerily silent. By the 10th day, officials were forced to admit what no one wanted to believe. The Crimson train had vanished completely between two stations less than 8 miles apart. Rumors began almost immediately. Some said the train had plunged into an uncharted ravine, swallowed by a landslide that covered its remains. Others whispered of sabotage by rival railroad workers or bandits who had derailed the train to loot it. But none of these explanations accounted for the absence of debris. The storm that followed the train's last known passage was fierce but not destructive enough to erase an entire locomotive. The canyon held its silence, the snow falling undisturbed over rails that led nowhere. For those who had waved goodbye in Denver, the memory of that crimson gleam fading into the mountains became the final image of their loved ones, swallowed whole by the endless dark of the Colorado wilderness. 3 days after the Crimson train was declared missing, reports began to pour in from the remote stations scattered along the Denver and Western line, accounts so strange that even seasoned railroad men hesitated to put them in writing. The first came from a night operator in Lawson who claimed he saw the train pass through just before midnight, its lamps flickering, its whistle low and distant. But when he rushed outside, the rails beneath his feet were cold, untouched, and silent. Hours later, a telegraph came from another station farther down the line describing the same sight, an engine of deep red steel gliding through the darkness, windows illuminated as if filled with life, yet moving faster than any train should. The reports all agreed on one thing: there were no scheduled departures that night, and no crew reported on duty. Soon, entire towns began to whisper of the ghost train. Ranchers claimed to hear its approach long before seeing it, the rhythmic clang of wheels on iron echoing across the valleys, accompanied by faint human sounds, laughter, singing, sometimes screams. The most chilling accounts came from miners working the upper ridges near Georgetown, who swore they saw a train cutting across a high track that had been abandoned years earlier, sparks flying from its wheels though no one stood at its helm. One man described it as a river of red light flowing through the storm. At first, railway officials dismissed the stories as hysteria born of grief and rumor. But when 2 engineers riding the midnight freight to Silver Plume swore they had been overtaken by a fast-moving train that vanished into thin air, the company was forced to take notice. According to their log, they saw the Crimson engine ahead of them, steam rolling, whistle blowing, yet as they approached the next curve, it was gone. No sound, no signal, nothing but cold air and the hiss of their own brakes. Witnesses began to speak of the faces they thought they saw inside the passing cars. Some said the passengers appeared calm, gazing outward as though unaware of their fate. Others described mouths open in silent screams, hands pressed to the glass, and eyes reflecting the fire of the lamps that flickered deep within. The sightings followed no clear schedule, but they always occurred at night, often during storms or in the heavy mist that hung over the mountain passes. By late November, the phenomenon had grown impossible to ignore. One telegraph operator near Idaho Springs recorded a message the moment he heard the whistle echo through the canyon, only to discover his equipment sparking and smoking seconds later. The wires burned through as though struck by lightning. His written note ended abruptly. "It's not on the line. It's above it." Investigators later found his station abandoned. The telegraph key fused to the desk by heat. The sightings continued for months. Some said the train reappeared every year on the anniversary of its disappearance. Others that it roamed without time or reason. But one detail never changed. Those who saw it always spoke of the same terrible thing, that for a brief moment, as it thundered past, they could hear the faint rhythm of its wheels. and the unmistakable sound of voices calling for help from within. When the official investigation began, the Denver and Western Railway sent a team of engineers, detectives, and company men into the mountains to uncover the truth. They followed every inch of track from Denver to Silver Plume, marking each tunnel, curve, and bridge where something could have gone wrong. But the search only deepened the mystery. Near the base of the twin tunnels, investigators discovered sections of rail that appeared to have been scorched, as though exposed to extreme heat. The wood beneath the ties was blackened but not burned, like it had been singed by something that left no ash. Beside the tracks, they found a mangled piece of copper wire that should have connected to the telegraph lines, but it was coiled into itself, fused at both ends as if melted by lightning. The engineers could not explain it. No storm had struck that night, and there were no signs of sabotage. When the investigators entered the tunnels themselves, the air grew strange, dense, heavy, and humming with a faint vibration that seemed to come from the rock itself. They found nothing inside except an abandoned tool chest, its metal hinges warped and rusted despite being recently maintained. The foreman who led the team, James Doolin, later wrote that the tunnel walls gave off a low metallic ringing, like the echo of distant machinery that never stopped. He described hearing faint voices, which his men dismissed as the sound of wind pushing through the granite bends. But when one of his assistants shined his lantern toward the far end of the tunnel, they swore they saw the glint of glass, like a window catching light, before it vanished into darkness. As the team pushed deeper, they uncovered fragments of passenger belongings scattered miles apart, an earring embedded in the dirt, a cracked monocle, and a set of leather gloves found folded neatly beside the tracks. The most alarming discovery came when they reached a narrow cut near Devil's Gate. The rails there had shifted ever so slightly inward, the iron bent by some unknown force. Between the rails, buried beneath loose gravel, they unearthed a charred piece of brass bearing the imprint of the Denver and Western emblem and the faintly etched words, Crimson Line No. 7. The find should have solved the mystery. Yet it only raised more questions because the serial number on the emblem matched no known engine in the company's records. Weeks later, investigators examined what remained of the maintenance logs from the Georgetown depot. Among them was an unsigned note scribbled in pencil. Do not enter the second tunnel after nightfall. The air hums when it's near. It was unclear who wrote it or when, but the handwriting appeared rushed, panicked. Some believed it was left by a worker who had seen the missing train, or whatever had become of it. The case files also mentioned strange mechanical interference, compasses spinning, lanterns dimming, and watches stopping all along the route. Theories of electrical experimentation began to circulate, fueled by rumors that the Crimson Train's engine had been fitted with a prototype power regulator, a device that could amplify current through the rail lines. But the railroad denied ever authorizing such an addition. By winter's first snow, the investigation was quietly closed. The official statement listed, catastrophic mechanical failure improbable, derailment in inaccessible terrain. Yet, the men who searched those tunnels left with a different understanding that something unnatural had taken hold of the Crimson Train that night, something neither mechanical nor human. As the weeks turned to months, the search parties gave up hope of finding the missing passengers alive, but the mountains refused to rest. Those who lived near the old line began to speak of strange sounds drifting through the canyons at night, long, mournful wails that rose from the tunnels and rolled across the snow like echoes of a train still running somewhere beneath the earth. The first reports came from miners stationed near Georgetown who worked late shifts underground. They claimed that after midnight, when the wind died and the world went still, the tunnels would begin to whisper. Some swore they could hear voices, faint but distinct, calling out names or weeping softly in the dark. A few even insisted they heard the rhythmic thud of wheels turning on invisible rails, fading only when lanterns were lit. By early spring of 1886, local ranchers joined the chorus of unsettling stories. Families living along Clear Creek reported hearing the whistle of a train that never arrived, its pitch distorted and mournful, carrying for miles through the valley. Dogs would bark and howl as if sensing something unseen moving through the fog. One settler's wife described being woken in the night by the sound of a piano drifting across the plains, a melody she later recognized as the same piece Eliza Grayson had planned to perform in Silver Plume the night she vanished. When her husband went outside, the sound stopped, replaced by the hollow echo of metal striking rock, distant and fading. The railroad company sent men to investigate, though most returned with little to report beyond the unnerving sense that the air itself felt charged, like the aftermath of a storm. One crewman claimed that deep inside the twin tunnels, his torch extinguished without wind, leaving behind the faint glow of red light that pulsed from somewhere far ahead. They fled, abandoning their tools. None of them volunteered to return. In Silver Plume, miners told of seeing strange lights flickering on the ridge, resembling lanterns swinging from a passing train, though the track there had long been closed. Others described figures walking along the old railbed, passengers dressed in 19th century attire, their faces pale and featureless in the moonlight. Some claimed these apparitions vanished the moment they were approached, dissolving into mist that left the smell of iron and smoke in its wake. What frightened people most, however, were the screams. They were said to echo through the canyons on windless nights, sharp and sudden, followed by the unmistakable screech of brakes on metal. Searchers once followed those sounds to a narrow gorge where the air vibrated with a low mechanical hum. Nothing was found except a scorched piece of track half buried in the ice. By summer, entire towns near the route refused to travel the old line after dark. The legend of the Crimson Train began to take hold, not as a missing locomotive, but as something cursed, trapped between time and terrain. And though the company sought to silence the stories, the people of the Rockies knew what they had heard, the endless cry of passengers still trying to reach a station that no longer existed. It wasn't until the autumn of 1891, 6 years after the disappearance, that the mountains began to give up fragments of what was left. A landslide near Empire Pass unearthed a section of the old Denver and Western track, long buried under rock and snow. When workers arrived to clear the debris, they discovered something glinting in the rubble, a rusted train coupling fused into a twisted shape, its metal warped as though melted by fire. Nearby, buried deep beneath layers of silt, they uncovered what appeared to be part of a passenger carriage door. The wood was scorched black, the glass in its window fused into a cloudy, bubbled mass. Stamped faintly into the frame were the words, "C line number 7, the very designation of the Crimson Train. The discovery reignited public fascination and fear. The company quickly sealed off the site, citing safety concerns, but word spread faster than they could contain it. Local miners who had been hired to assist claimed to have found more artifacts before officials arrived. A pocket watch, half melted, its hands frozen at 12:03, a woman's shoe preserved in the dirt, the heel snapped clean, and most disturbingly, several buttons from a conductor's uniform, each one blackened and fused to the surrounding gravel. These men spoke of a heavy silence that hung over the site, as though the air itself carried weight. One miner later confessed that he had heard something faint beneath the earth as they dug, a sound like distant clattering wheels that faded whenever they stopped to listen. Months later, farther west near Silver Plume, a second discovery was made. During maintenance on an old service tunnel, a foreman uncovered what looked like a fragment of a brass nameplate wedged between the stones. When polished, it revealed the inscription, Eliza G. Theories spread instantly that it belonged to Eliza Grayson, the pianist lost aboard the Crimson Train. Some said the discovery proved the train had derailed and been buried by an avalanche, while others argued the artifacts had somehow resurfaced from another time or place. The railroad issued statements dismissing the finds as unrelated debris from earlier construction, but the public didn't believe it. There were too many coincidences, too many unanswered questions. In the following years, hikers and explorers continued to stumble upon strange remnants scattered along the abandoned route. Charred timber pieces, brass screws fused into rock, and occasionally fragments of porcelain dinnerware marked with the Denver and Western insignia. Every piece told the same story: heat, destruction, and sudden violence. Yet no human remains were ever recovered. Not a single bone, no trace of the 21 souls who had boarded the train that October morning. By the time the decade turned, the line itself had been permanently closed. The tunnels were sealed, the rails dismantled. But each time the earth shifted or snow melted from the slopes, more fragments appeared, small, insignificant objects that carried immense weight. To some, they were evidence of catastrophe. To others, proof of something unearthly, as if the mountain itself was slowly returning what it had once swallowed whole. Decades passed, yet the legend of the Crimson Train refused to fade. The line had long been dismantled, the tunnels sealed shut, and the company that once built it dissolved into obscurity. But those who lived in the shadow of the Rockies still spoke of it in hushed voices. They said that on certain nights, cold, mist-laden nights when the moon hung low and pale, the sound of a train could still be heard winding through the canyons. No engine lights, no smoke, only the echo of wheels grinding against rails that no longer existed. It began as a distant hum, rising slowly into a rhythmic thunder that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some claimed they had seen it, a crimson glow cutting through the fog, flickering like a heartbeat before vanishing into the dark. Travelers along the old route reported strange occurrences even decades later. Campers near the ruins of Georgetown swore they heard a whistle in the distance, soft but unmistakable, followed by a rush of wind that carried the faint scent of iron and smoke. A few brave souls claimed to have witnessed the train itself, a shimmering outline of metal and steam moving soundlessly through the air. Inside its windows, they saw the shapes of passengers seated in perfect stillness, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes locked forward as though eternally bound to their seats. Witnesses said the lights inside the cars glowed red, pulsing faintly as the train passed, illuminating the faces within for only a second before fading into the mist. In 1913, a group of railway historians attempted to retrace the original route for research, documenting what remained of the line. They brought with them modern equipment, cameras, compasses, and recording instruments, but all failed within minutes of entering the old tunnels. Their lanterns flickered and died, and the compass needles spun wildly without direction. One of the men later wrote in his journal that he had heard the faint clinking of chains and footsteps just beyond the light. Another reported feeling a rush of air as if something massive had passed inches beside him, though nothing was there. When the group emerged, shaken and pale, they refused to continue their work. Locals began calling it the moving ghost, a train doomed to wander the mountains forever, never reaching its destination, carrying souls who could not rest. Some said it was punishment for man's arrogance, for daring to carve through the heart of nature with iron and steam. Others believed the Crimson Train had slipped into another realm, trapped between time and eternity, reappearing only when the world thinned enough to let it through. On stormy nights, travelers still report seeing a faint red light weaving through the clouds above the mountain ridges, moving steadily before fading at dawn. Those who have heard the whistle describe it as mournful, like a cry stretched thin by time itself. The Crimson Train, they say, still runs, its passengers forever in motion, chasing a station that exists only in memory. What happened to the Crimson Train is more than a mystery. It's a wound carved into the rails of history, a question that time itself refuses to answer. 21 souls vanished into the Rockies, leaving behind no wreckage, no graves, only whispers of iron wheels echoing through the dark. And as the legend endures, you have to wonder, did they really disappear? Or are they still out there, trapped in motion, repeating the same final journey every time the night grows cold? If stories like this stir something in you, if you find beauty in the unexplained and truth in the shadows of forgotten places, then join us. Subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into the lost chapters of history. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think happened that night. Was it human error, sabotage, or something far beyond what science could explain? Every theory brings us closer to the truth, or perhaps deeper into the mystery. The rails of the past are long, and there are countless ghostly journeys still waiting to be told. Your voice keeps them alive. So listen closely to the silence between the echoes and remember, not every story ends. Some simply keep moving. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and step aboard once more as we uncover the next forgotten tale lost to time.